I do talk off the cuff, but I did put an outline in the chat earlier. And so you might want to download it. And I don't know for those folks who are there, if you have a way of emailing it to them or making it available so they can pull it up on their phones or whatever else, or you can share it online. But it's just a jumping off point. And I think that Christina knows I like feedback. I like you to disagree with me. I like you to take me on, and I like to jump off on to where you want me to go. So my notes are really just a kind of a starting point. But Christina put down that I was going to do something on master leasing, I think. And so I did title it Master Leasing, a low-cost way to gain financial freedom. But I think you really got to start with, why do you want to own real estate? What are the benefits you want from the real estate? You know, I know what mine were. Mine were to gain financial freedom, which meant that I could work with whom I wanted, when I wanted, if I wanted. And if I didn't want to, I didn't have to work. But the big problem is today, darn hard to get started in the business. It's, you know, I'm glad I'm not starting out now. Now my kids are doing fine now, but they had to use kind of different tools. Unless you have $5 million in your wallet, kind of hard to buy some houses right now, especially when whatever they're put on the market for, they're bid up in the first 10 minutes and there's a bunch of contracts on them. And you know, if you're doing flipping or you're buying notes, all those other things, I don't know people who've really ended up getting wealthy doing that. You really have to end up owning appreciating assets that will produce you income hedged to inflation. And, you know, when you either no longer can work or you no longer choose to work, they'll work for you. Because flipping and some of these other things, it doesn't work. Nothing happens unless you're there doing it. So let me kind of start out in this, going through this. But I also want to just point out a couple things actually before I start. There was an article in Fortune magazine that came out in January 7th of 1920. And the title was A Prediction for 2030, a Government Takeover of Rental Housing. And it's quite an article if you want to look it up, or I can even put the link in the chat if you'd like, because I still have that link. But it says, you know, government may not own all the properties, but they'll essentially master lease it. They'll lease your stuff as a government entity, sublease it. They'll determine what the rent is and whether they get paid, what needs to get done. And if there's anything left, they may give it to the owners. The world for landlords has changed so dramatically overnight. You know, we have these legislators who create these feel-good laws that they think they're helping the tenants. And I think they're really shooting themselves in the foot, because what really happens is during good economic times like right now, landlords are saying, you guys are too tough for me, I've had enough. And they can sell their properties out for high dollar in 5 minutes. And so what really happens is you have less housing for tenants than you ever had before. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. I got something just yesterday, an email, and this was from someone in Southern Los Angeles. And I thought it would be helpful to just point this out to you, because I think the real key right now, I've always thought it was management, but I think it's especially true right now, to learn how to walk between the landmines that the legislators put in front of you and still get folks to do what you want them to do and have them enjoy it in the process. It's getting tougher and tougher. So here's this guy that wrote me, on a group that I've got the other day. He has 5 tenants in a South Los Angeles co-living home, and 5 out of 5 have stopped paying him rent because there's no consequence for them failing to pay rent. And he just covers all 5 of them. The first one bought a car instead of paying rent, and she's been in arrears ever since January of 2021. The next guy stopped paying rent. He claims to work 70-hour work weeks, but he's got plenty of income, but he's not paying the rent. Third one claims that he put the porch pilots stole $450 boots that he'd ordered from Amazon, and lo and behold, he stopped paying rent after that. Fourth one hasn't paid rent since April of 20, posts numerous commercials he's performed in on Facebook. And the last one, who says he hadn't paid rent since June of 20, flaunted his world travels on Facebook, said he couldn't find a job because of the pandemic when he got laid off in the summer of 20. So how does he have money to travel to France, Guatemala, San Francisco, and numerous national parks around the country? I think people are seeing this more and more. And so I've always thought management was the key to this business. I think if you don't know how to manage well, you're really just inventorying the real estate for those of us who do know how to manage. I mean, I can just tell you from COVID, I've got all my rents. My rents all come in before the first of the month, every month. They come in using ACH, which is automatic clearinghouse. That means I initiate, I take it from their bank accounts. If they owe me more, I take more. If they owe me less, I take less. How do I set that up? Why did my tenants pay me? Well, first of all, because I screen well. I know exactly what I'm doing. And when I say I screen well, everyone over the age of 18 fills out a separate application. And my application packets are probably 7 to 10 pages each. We check 5-year landlord history and at least your last 2 landlords if you've been one place for 5 years. 5 years employment history. We're looking for FICO scores of 700 and up. Could we accept less? Sure we could, but there are plenty of people looking right now, and I want people to self-screen themselves out. You can, if you put a property on the market in our community and in many communities around the country right now for rent, there's really a feeding frenzy that people are panicked that they won't get a property. So make your criteria stronger. Have a policy procedure manual that says why you do what you do. Don't discriminate illegally based on any federal, state, or local fair housing laws, but you better darn well discriminate based on employment, based on income, based on credit. And credit to me is the most important thing you can look at. Why? Because it not only shows people financial ability to pay, it shows their willingness to pay. And the willingness to pay is the most important aspect. So starting through my little outline, managing tenants is a way you can reach your financial goals, but you must first change your paradigm about the landlord-tenant relationship in order to enjoy the journey and not to burn out. I think an awful lot of people, the only reason they don't get in the real estate business is they're scared to death of tenants and toilets and trash. And I've been doing this since 1978. And I can tell you, I don't have those problems. I really do believe my tenants are my greatest assets. For those of you who've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know the difference between an asset and a liability. An asset pays you, a liability eats you. A single family house, which is what I choose to invest in, eats you alive if you don't have a warm body in there, maintaining it, first of all, and then paying rent, secondly. So it's the tenant that's the asset. And so finding the right tenants and looking at your tenants as you would employing people in your business, because that is what you're doing. You're employing your tenants to do a job. And so when they qualify, then you need to share expectations as to what that job description is. And I'll share mine really quickly. It's the primary thing we want from our tenants, and what we think we do is we do think we're hiring them to do a job. The primary thing we're looking for is that they maintain and improve our houses and our grounds. That's the number one thing. That's the most important. Number two, it's obvious we want them to pay the rent on time. But if they don't want to pay the rent on time, they shouldn't do business with us because we're too tough. Number three, we want them to get along with the neighbors. Number four, I look them in the eye and I kind of smile and I say, we want you to stay at least until you die, and hopefully until your kids die after that. And they chuckle about that because, they may not want to stay quite that long. But I will tell you, our longest tenant was with us for just under 25 years. Our next longest one for 18 years. We've had many, many over 10 years. Now, I know Jack Fullerton's on this call, and Jack beats me for the length of tenants. I know he's got at least one tenant he's had in his properties for over 30 years. So, he wins. But the objective is to not have turnover, to deal with good people, and move them in. And, you know, some people say, well, how can you be hiring tenants to work for you? You're not paying them. You are paying them. The currency you're using to pay your tenants is the currency of good housing. And so keep that in mind. You are giving something for what you expect back from them. So tenants are the solution to meeting your goals. They're not the problem. And if they are the problem, something's wrong with what you're doing. And so you really need to do an autopsy and figure out what you did wrong to not have that same problem come up again. In the single family house business, tenants are your on-site resident managers. I think the single family house is the only piece of real estate that comes with an on-site resident manager. What does that mean? It means not only will they maintain the inside of the property, which is their home, but they'll maintain the outside. If you've got a property that a tenant can walk outside the front door, walk all the way around the house and say, get off my property, that's an unusual thing. You know, I've had multis. I choose not to have multis anymore. In my neck of the woods in the winter, you got to plow driveways for multis. In the summer, you got to take care of yards for multis. It's just a different beastie. And you've got folks living on tops of each other and the sides of each other, and you got noises and smells, and someone doesn't get along, or the market changes, and the new guy coming in comes in at a lower rent than an existing tenant, and the existing tenant finds out. Funny things happen in multis. One unpleasant occupant can move all your other tenants out of the building lickety split if you're not careful and you don't deal with it. Treat your tenants with respect and trust them if you want to gain your trust. That's really important in that how do you get people to trust you? You have to trust them first. Now, that doesn't mean we don't shake them down real well before we give them the keys to our castle. We do. We really shake them down. But I'd much rather be a mentor than a policeman. And my viewpoint of most landlords is they hand their tenants a lease, and they say, sign here, press hard, last copy is yours, read it later if you want, move into the house, sit in a chair, face the wall, and don't touch anything. And if you do anything wrong at all, here's how I'm going to beat you up over your security deposit or whatever else. That's not our approach. Our approach is, here's our house, now go make it a home. If you don't want to live there, I don't want you being there. I want you to be able to get out if you want to get out, but I'm advertising that I'm in the long-term business, and clearly I'm in the long-term business. I want to, you know, I don't really like the idea of even tenant management. I really like the idea of tenant leadership. I think you want to empower, you want to inspire and influence your tenants to do the best job possible. And you want to use positive reinforcement. I mean, as I said, my tenants they really are wonderful human beings. If you ask a group of people, how many of you were tenants? Pretty much everyone in the room is all going to agree. They've been tenants at some point in time in their life, when they were in college or whenever. And then you say, well, how many of you were lousy tenants? And you always get some hands that go up. And the answer is, don't do business with people like that. Do business with folks, if you were a good tenant like you, and your job is to just be able to find those folks without breaking any federal, state, or local fair housing laws. Treat each person as an individual. Show you care. Use the platinum rule, not the golden rule. Everyone knows the golden rule, that it's treat others the way you'd like to be treated. The platinum rule is different than that. The platinum rule is treat everyone the way they want to be treated. Now, think about this for a second. You run a business and you hire employees. Every employee is different. Some employees want the gold star. They want the best employee parking spot of the month. That's what they want, next to the door. Others want flexible work hours so they can go deal with their kids. Others want high pay. Everyone has different needs. Your tenants are the same way. So your job is, once your tenants are in, find out what their needs are, push that button, and really treat them the way they'd like to be treated. If you do that, you'll have very little problems in this business. As I say, I've been doing this since 1978. No one has ever hinted at suing me. I've clearly had problems. I've clearly tuned my skill set over that time. But, I think that if you know how to manage, boy, everything else is just easy. So how do you get started? And I think the key is if you can align yourself with some gray-haired folks, some older folks who have been in it for a long time. And if you can just hang around them, offer to work for free. You really want to learn from their expertise. There's a whole generation of wonderful instructors and also owner-operators that aren't going to be around forever. I mean, some of you in the chat rooms, some people mentioned to me earlier, Peter Fortunato. Well, he's a good friend, but he is older. I'm older. I'll be 71 this year. And so I've listed some folks here. The very first one is Jimmy Napier. He's dead. You can't talk to him anymore. You can't learn from him. But look at how these guys, the guys who got financially free, how did they do it? And Jimmy, for example, I put some names down here just so I can kind of give you some ideas. If I remember right, and I heard this a long time ago, so I may be wrong, and I love people to jump in if Christina allows you to, and certainly correct me. But I believe he had someone contact him from Guam that had some money and wanted him to buy and manage some properties for him. And Jimmy got on a plane and went to see him. And Jimmy lived in a little tiny redneck town in the panhandle of Florida. And that one thing that he did created a relationship that went on for a long time. And Jimmy partnered in that situation and ended up owning a whole bunch of real estate. And he went on to greater things after that. But it got him started. Jack Easton, who's in your neck of the woods, he's in North Hollywood. He started with partners. And the partner, he was the grunt guy. He was the finder, fixer, and operator, and he used someone else's money. But he did what other people didn't want to do, which is manage. If you can do that and you're good at it, boy, you can carve yourself in either for income or a piece of the equity or both. Dennis Kelch, a good friend of mine in St. Petersburg, Florida, did the exact same thing. He was going to a chiropractor, and he'd talk to this doctor while he was being worked on, and he'd say, well, tell me about your investments. And the chiropractor said, well, I don't want to talk about that. I mean, and Dennis said, well, what do you mean? We said, well, everything I buy in the stock market goes down. And Dennis said, well, why the heck are you doing that? And bottom line is Dennis talked him into giving him some money. And again, Dennis was the guy who found the property, operated the property, and they carved it up. And years later, when they split it all up, they each ended up with about 45 single family houses free and clear. That you can live on that. I mean, that's not bad. And it was just a little talking to people, just like when we're split up either in person in groups to meet and greet and talk to people, or in these rooms where they send us out and we say hello. You got to tell people what you want to do. You got to tell everyone you can think of, people in your church, your kids' school, parents, wherever it is. I can remember Jackie Lang told the story one time that she had all these mothers of preschool children in a MOPS program, and she convinced them to let her put magnetic signing on their vehicles that as they drove around town, it all said, I buy houses or something to that effect. And the number was Jackie's. And if someone bought a house off of someone's sign, they got a spiff from Jackie, they got something. So she had 30 women driving all over town advertising what she wanted. Danny Williams, good friend of mine. I've known him for 40 years. I did a deal with Danny. Danny had an unpleasant situation, I think, if you asked him. During the 2008 to 2010 time period, he had a bunch of houses that he owned, but they had too much debt on them. And really they ended up with negative cash flow. So what was his solution? His solution was, he said, he was in the Atlanta area, housing was cheap. And he came to me and he came to other people and he said, listen, if you put up the money, I'll buy good houses, I'll take care of them and square it all away. And you'll be doing a heck of a lot better than you're doing if you have some money sitting at the bank and at 0.02% interest. So what did I do? I had one of the entities I controlled put up $114,000. That bought us 3 houses. You can't buy 3 houses in total fixed up, ready to go for $114,000 in the LA area. But, and I do not oppose owning properties where I'm not, or where I don't have the networks. But it was okay for me to put the money for someone I'd known for 40 years to do that. And we got a 3-2-2, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage house, a 3-2 1-car garage, and a 3-2 no-car garage. And they're good houses. I saw them. And Danny ran them. The entity that put up the money, that was a loan. And the loan was stated that I got half the net income from the properties as interest. That meant he got half the net income and he didn't put a dime in it. Then Tilney, I had an option on half the upswing separately. So I got half capital gains on when we sold them. And that was a very simple way for us to do business. But instead of partnering, I would always recommend you carve up the benefits. You want each person to control 100% of what they got. I had a loan in one entity that I could sell anytime I wanted to someone else. I had an option I could sell, and no one had to, there was no decision-making as to when the property got sold. The owner got to decide that. Danny got to decide when to sell the darn property. I find partnerships, for example, are real easy to start and real hard to stop sometimes. The only partnership I want is really with my marriage. And we've been married 48 years. And so, you know, I hope that's going to work. I think it will. But I think it's much better in real estate to say who's going to own it, who's going to master lease it, who's going to loan against it, who's going to have an option on it. Carve the benefits up rather than go into partnership. Okay, master leasing. First of all, what the heck is it? It's if I rent one of Christina Sutter's properties and my lease gives me the right to sublease it, and I turn around and sublease it to Jack Fullerton, and I get some benefits in the process between my lease with Christina and my sublease to Jack. Hold on one second. So I wanted to give you some examples of people who've done some master leasing, people I know, and you can look them up. The towns are here. John Kane and Lauren Brand. They were a young couple. They came to Colorado. I'm not even sure where they came from, but they had a pop-up camper and they ended up in Frisco. And they were rock climbers and they were snowboarders and they wanted the outdoors, and they started master leasing. And 2 years ago, they told me they were making over $20,000 a month. And in the process, just from leasing properties for that period of time, they'd had the opportunity to buy properties. Because think about this for a second. If you lease a property, it's almost like you get to test drive it and see how it works as a rental. And it gives you time with the owner that if you don't mess up, meaning if you underpromise and overperform, you do more than you say you're going to do, and you do it faster than you say you're going to do it, that when an owner ultimately decides that it's time for that property to go away, who are they going to call? They're going to call you. And I can tell you, I picked up a bunch of properties from owners that I used to master lease for. Matt Funk, he's a guy in Tampa, Florida. He owned a printing company. And for 2 years, he printed a manual for I do a 3-day seminar, and he printed my manual. Second year, he came to my seminar. Well, then he sold his printing company, and he stayed home while his wife went out selling audio-visual equipment because she was very good at it. And he raised his 2 kids. And while he was raising his kids around the pool, he started master leasing properties. He very quickly replaced his income, and I'm sure he replaced his wife's, but I think she's still doing what she does because she enjoys it. And they have a lot of properties, both ones that they master lease, but they've done just very, very well. Jan Laser, some of you may know her. She's out from your neck of the woods, Monterey, California. She's a real pro. If you ever have the opportunity to meet her or see what she's doing, she's really first class. Her story started, she was got transferred there. She was married to a GI. And I think the language school is in Monterey. And so she was there, and a number of years went by, and she wanted to take off in the summer and go to Hawaii. So she rented her house in Monterey and went to Hawaii and rented a place. And at the end of the summer, came back and she found she'd made money from the whole process. So with that in mind, she started leasing properties and subleasing them. She is a licensed real estate broker. As I say, she's a real pro. She's done a lot. But there was a time when high price houses weren't selling in Pebble Beach. And so she went and looked at, I've got the number here. There were 9 properties that were on the market for sale. And she went to the owners and said, gee, I'm not going to buy them, but why don't you lease them to me while they're for sale? And if you get a contract on them, if you give me 60 days notice, I'll cancel my lease. And I'll lose you less by doing this than you're losing right now with a vacant house. So the owners leased her 9 properties. And in 6 months, she made $84,000. How'd she do that? She put some furniture in them and subleased them as vacation rentals. Now, I can tell you, I've never done that, but it worked great for her. Lindsay Jensen's a gal right in my town in Colorado Springs. I say my town, I'm here 4 months a year. She told me just the other day that she's only been doing it, I think, 2 years, but she told me the other day that she's now running 70 houses. And yes, she owns some, but the biggest part of them are ones that she master leased. I think that's absolutely incredible. I got a little nervous that she was going too fast and furious and she might stub her toe, but she's having a good time. And she said something the other day that I thought was really great. She said, I told my husband that my tenants taught me that people are really good. Isn't that interesting? Most landlords don't take that approach, but she's got good folks in her properties. They're improving her yards. They're doing all kinds of wonderful things for her. And it all comes down to the management. Tim Thornton is a ordained minister, and he was doing, well, among other things, Bible studies out of his house. And I'm not exactly sure what else, but he didn't have enough income to support his wife and kids in the lifestyle he needed. And so he started master leasing properties and subleasing them short term as vacation rentals, Airbnbs. And I was surprised because, again, I haven't done the short term. To me, that's too much work. You got to coordinate people to change the sheets and clean and do those kinds of things. But he found he could master lease rental property from owners, sublease it short term, net the owner more, and take a big chunk out of the middle in the process. And he's continued to do that. My son-in-law, Kurt Elmas, he was a sports writer, newspaper guy, and he got moved around a few different places. And last place he worked as a newspaper guy was in Pocatello, Idaho. And we brought him back to Colorado Springs in the fall one time so we could see they had a grandkid. I mean, what the heck? We wanted to see our daughter and Kurt and our grandson. So we brought him back to Colorado Springs, and after we visited for a few days, I took him to the airport early one morning, and we're talking, and Kurt said, I think we want to get another rental in Colorado Springs. And they had one because they'd lived here and he'd worked for the newspaper here for a while, and they just kept the house after they moved. And I said, well, gee, I think Colorado Springs is a good place to have rentals. And so then he said, well, actually, I think we want to move back to Colorado Springs. And I said, well, it was a great place for us to raise a family, but what would you do? And my daughter chimed in and said, Dad, you have no idea. We've been up all night talking, and we want a hostile takeover of your company. And I said, well, there isn't much to take over. And there really isn't much to take over. But he set up an LLC, started Master Leasing, has done very, very well. He supports his 3 kids and a dog, and had a motorhome. Recently just sold the motorhome, but he teaches his kids every sport known to man pretty much, and really controls his time. He can work with whom he wants, when he wants, if he wants. And so the lifestyle can be great. And I don't know another way you can generate ongoing monthly income without any capital or very little capital in this business. It's really an incredible way to get started. Now, let's look at what you can actually accomplish with leases, because I think you'll find that you can transfer a whole bunch of the bundle of ownership rights that you can get through ownership through a lease, and yet you don't have some of the liabilities involved and some of the risks involved. So just looking at some of them, and I'm taking this list from Peter Fortunato has a wonderful drawing he did of a house, and he carves it up in blocks. And in each block, he shows, what that block in the house will do. And so, going down it, you can manage it, you can get income from it, you can get profit from the property, you can get tax benefits, you can get growth, amortization, security. He has 8 different things, I think. And I don't know if I put all eight up or not. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But looking at those items, clearly, if I lease a property from Christine with the right to sublease it, I can manage the occupant. And again, I'd rather say I'd like to lead the occupant, but I have control over the occupant. She has control over me. And so you can get the management. Now, the income. Well, clearly, if I lease a property on a performance basis that says, I'll give you, and these are made up numbers just to give you the idea, I'll give you 90% of whatever I collect if and when I collect it, then clearly that would show that I get 10% out of the deal. And I wouldn't owe anything unless I collected something first. Now, so you can do a performance lease, you can do a fixed lease. I could guarantee to pay Christina a set amount each month, whether it's vacant or full. I could guarantee to take care of all the expenses up to a stop loss. There's all kinds of different leases you can put together, craft. You can do a hybrid lease that gives a guaranteed base amount and then a percentage of the rents I collect on top of that. Lots of ways to handle it. Now, that sounds maybe like I'm managing the property for Christina, but I'm not. I'm a principal in the deal. I have no fiduciary responsibility to her. I'm working for me. She's working for her. The only reason she leases the property to me is because I can give her a benefit she needs. The only reason I will lease the property from her is if I can get some benefit that I need. And the nice thing about a master lease that will come up a little later is that there is no one size fits all. That's a wonderful thing, because what it means is when you find a situation where people have a need and you don't know what the need is, you go to develop to help them discover what their need is. And if you can fill their need, then everything else you get to keep. And that's the way you should negotiate. You got to first find out what they need. And just to give you an example, let's say that the family is in Colorado Springs and the dad gets transferred to Cincinnati, Ohio. And so they have this extra house, and for whatever reason, the market's not right, or they really want to come back to the house at a later time. They think they do anyway. And so what is their problem? The problem is they've got 3 teenage boys that if they don't get the boys under the control of the dad real quick, they're going to lose the whole family. And so you can come in and help solve that problem for them. Profit. The example I put here for myself is Joe West. Joe West was a fireman in Mississippi, if I remember correct. And he was a real good friend of Jack Miller's. And Jack, for those of you who don't know who Jack Miller was, a lot of the teachers today really go back to him. He's our touchstone. He's no longer with us, but he was an incredible guy, and he developed many, many different types of classes. But Joe sent Jack a deed for a property one day. And Jack said, well, Joe, why the heck did you send me this? And Joe said, well, did I do that? Darn it. You just hold on to that. If I did that, and Jack had to pay a little bit or a monthly little bit, I'm not quite sure, but Joe was trying to get Jack a little bit because they were really good friends. And there was nothing wrong with the house. It was a good house. So time goes on a little bit. And Joe calls up Jack and says, Jack, I'm a lousy manager. And would you mind terribly if I didn't quite say it right. Joe gave Jack a deed to 50% interest in the property. So Joe owned half and Jack owned half. And Joe called up Jack and said, Jack, would you mind terribly, since I'm a really terrible manager, if out of my portion of the income, I hire a manager? Jack said, no, of course not. If it's your money, go for it. Have fun. So what did Joe do? Joe gave away half of his half to someone to manage the property. So here we got the situation that Joe's got no money in the deal and positive cash flow and 25% ownership. Not bad. That's not a bad profit in the deal. Taxes. The difference between management income and rental income is dramatic. In what way is it dramatic? Rental income is defined by the IRS as passive income. Management income, if you manage for an owner, is defined as active income. So what does that do from a tax standpoint? Well, on $100,000 of property management income, you're going to pay a little more than $31,000 in federal income taxes. On that exact same $100,000 of master leased income, meaning rental income, you'll pay $19,000 plus dollars. Why the difference? I mean, I wish this was interactive and you could talk and I could ask you questions, because I think it's a better, I do better, I get more energized. But bottom line is, active income, W-2 income, is subject to self-employment tax, which is about 15%. So just by changing from managing a property to leasing the exact same property on the same amount of money, your net income went up a lot, went up about, went from 19, you got the difference between 31,000 and 19,000. So not bad, $12,000 more net to yourself. Growth. The first master lease I ever did was in 1984. I leased a house for 35 years at a fixed rent. And I secured my lease with a deed of trust that said that if the owners failed to pay the underlying encumbrances or taxes and insurance, I could foreclose. And I didn't like the house, and I wasn't dealing with a walking wounded in terms of taking advantage of them. I was dealing with a licensed real estate broker who was a good personal friend. So I'd like to share with you how this transaction took place, but I'd also tell you that 10 years down the road, I was given half the appreciation to remove my property, to remove the lease from the property, and we sold it to the tenant. That wasn't a bad deal for me. I got good positive cash flow during the lease, and I got half the upswing later. I'm not going to tell you the whole story because I have limited amount of time. I just got a notice that I have, I think, 15 minutes. Amortization. The only way you can get amortization through a lease is if you couple it with an option on the owner's equity. So as the owner pays down and you have the option to buy the property at whenever you want, at some point in time under some terms and conditions, if you just take subject to their debt, then you would get the amortization. Security, long-term well-secured leases can be used as collaterals for loans. They're very valuable. I mean, can you imagine my 35-year loan at a fixed rent? That was a very, very valuable asset. In fact, the IRS says if you have a leasehold interest that's 30 years or longer, you own the property. Okay, moving right along. Master leasing offers some unique benefits for master tenant that you don't get with ownership. What are they? You don't need any money, or very, very little. Very little risk if property values drop. Think of the guys who bought properties from 2006 to 2008 that wish they didn't, they couldn't get out. I know people who were in this business and are no longer here today. You know, that's really sad that they lost it and have to start all over. If you had a lease, it's much easier to get out of a lease than it is to get out of title. You can draft by design and not by default. There's no standard paperwork. Major, major, major benefit. If you go buy a property and you go to closing, people shove a bunch of papers under your nose and you got to sign their paperwork. There are no leases here that you're going to use. You're going to create your own. So when you're the master tenant, when you're leasing it from the owner, your lease is going to be pro tenant because you're the tenant. Now, when you turn around and sublease to the occupant, it's going to be pro landlord because you're the landlord. The other thing is leasing works anywhere and with better houses than you could afford to purchase. The first house I bought in 1978 cost me $28,500. And it was a little 800 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath house with a 1-car garage on the outside. On the inside, people had gone in and put sheetrock right over the garage door, right over the window, raised the floor, put in a popcorn ceiling with speckles and a conical fireplace and no windows in the room. And I bought this with a friend and he was a bachelor and he said, well, that makes it romantic. Well, it wasn't romantic. It couldn't afford carpet anywhere in the house. It had low-end vinyl. That's not the house I want to put good tenants in. The nice thing about leasing is you can have a territory that you want to farm that have good houses in them. And you can rent those good houses because you're not going to pay more than they're worth. And if you're renting them on a performance basis, there's no way you can get hurt and you can rent to good tenants who would live in those houses. There's no competition in this business at all. And quite honestly, if you're, anything a property management company can do, you can do better because they have one size fits all. People call and say, how much? If people call me, it's like, well, that depends. Sometimes we don't charge anything at all. Sometimes we'll guarantee the rent, whether it's vacant or full, and take care of all the expenses up to a stop loss. When can we get together and share ideas? You need to find out a little bit more what it is I think I do, and I need to find out a little bit more about your situation. The real estate business is a people business. You got to be eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly. You don't make the deals over the phone. And so I really think there's really good opportunities there. You can test drive properties before acquiring. I kind of mentioned that before. Not all properties make good rentals. It is a low profile. The problem with owning a whole bunch of properties, people ask me how many houses I owned earlier. You don't want people to know because you have a bullseye on the back of your back. If people think you have a lot of equity, they might just stub their toe going in their front door of their house, and all of a sudden you got a lawsuit. As a tenant, you have a very low profile. You're a tenant. The laws are pro-tenant. It's all to help you. Negative cash flow property can provide you positive cash flow. What do I mean by that? Well, one of our marketing ploys in prior days when it was really hard to get the cash flows right, as it is right now, is not that we'd make the owners a lot of money, but that we'd lose them less than they're losing right now with a vacant house. It doesn't matter if they've got a negative cash flow. What does matter is that, number one, they have the financial ability to fund that negative cash flow, and they've got the willingness to do that. Leases can be long-term. I've already covered that. Interest rates don't impact you at all. You don't care what they do. Some of us in this room, very, very few, remember when prime rate was 21%. You guys that have seen it back at 2%, you don't understand that. But interest rates do go up, down, and sideways, and they'll go up again sometime down the road. Big ticket expenses aren't your problem if that's the way you've drafted your lease. You don't have to take care of the roofs, the sewers, the asbestos, the lead-based paint, all that stuff, the air conditioners. It depends what you draft into the lease. And certainly you'd have a stop loss. You get all the benefits that the owners don't need. Management really does fit the ELF formula if it's handled correctly. And I got to give credit to Warren Harding for the ELF formula. The ELF formula stands for, and Warren's no longer with us, but he was an educator from years ago. The ELF formula was easy, lucrative, and fun. And I'm here to tell you that if you screen correctly, meaning hire the best qualified, not the first come, first serve, and then you share expectations as to what you want from them, and you have open communication, and then you create systems to do to do everything you don't need to do with a tenant, but don't give up the personal touch. Too often I've seen property management companies where they want applicants to have self showings on the house. They want the applications filled out online. They want the leases filled out online. And if the management company could get them the keys without ever seeing them, they'd like to do that. That's not this business. This is a people business. Don't forget that. You need to have a rapport with your tenants. Now think about this for a second, and I'm just winding down here. I think providing well-maintained housing for long-term occupancy for me is extremely satisfying. Number one, you're providing one of the most basic human needs, housing. You get to work with wonderful people. You're not McDonald's. You don't have to serve everyone that comes in the door. Yes, you do need to adhere to federal, state, and local fair housing laws, but you can qualify in most places, not all. You can't qualify in Minneapolis based on credit reports. You can't pull those anymore. You can't do best qualified in Seattle, Washington. It's got to be first come, first serve. So number one, you do need to know the laws where you live, but you do get to largely pick people as long as you stay within the law. Your tenants pay for your investments. Isn't that incredible? I mean, you just need to tie up the property and the tenants will buy them for you. And the rents and the equities generally increase over time and they don't wear out. A number of years ago, I ran a $3 million mortgage portfolio side by side a $3 million house portfolio. I can tell you the house portfolio is much more satisfying for me. The biggest thing is it doesn't wear out. And the second thing is that if interest rate drop, people on the notes call you up and say, if you won't renegotiate, we're going to refinance and pay you off. And if it gets too tough, they leave the keys in the mailbox. But no matter what happens, it's much faster to get a tenant out of a property than an owner out of a property to get that property producing income again. Rental income replaces labor income and can continue for multiple generations. No one can ever force you to retire. Now, that's really important. I'm going to be 71 years old this year. And as you get older, there's less and less people that want to spend time with you. My tenants will talk to me, and I enjoy talking to them. I will tell you, and again, there's only a few of you that will understand this, but I do feel like the Maytag repairman who sits in his office waiting for the phone to ring, but nothing ever breaks that's Maytag, so they don't call. My tenants don't call unless they have a problem. And if they have a problem, it is my problem, and I want to help them. You're never bored in this business. I think I've used up my time. If not, I can keep going, but I think we're done. And thank you very much. Am I right?
Thank you. That was great.
Have I used up?
Yes. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
I can.
You can. That's lovely. Thank you, David, so very, very much. It sounded like it was rich with information. I had multiple people coming out telling me what a wonderful job it was and how much they were enjoying listening to you because you had so much blooming information. So I'm going to, is there stuff in the chat that we need to talk about? Is that why the chat is up?
Well, let's see.
Nope.
See if anybody has any questions.
Anybody have any questions in the chat? So we have, let me look at my watch real quick here.
20 minutes.
Okay, we have 20 minutes. So here's the thing. I can do questions for 5 minutes. And the reason why we're being, oh, perfect. Thank you, Alex. Perfect. He just got my text. So David's not allowed to sell, right? That's his agreement. He's here to educate you guys, right? But David does have a seminar coming up. So David, I put it up here whether you want me to or not. So you're just gonna have to deal with it. But this is David's seminar that's coming up. You can find it on his website very quickly. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, September 24th and 26th, 24th to 26th. David, you can obviously put it in the chat as well so people at least know that you actually have a 3-day seminar. Once you take the seminar, you'll get a true sense of how in-depth. Like one of the things when I took David's seminar, one of the things that David told me was, well, one of the things that David talked about from the stage was his application process. And then he has, I don't know if you shared this story, David, that you have on your application people, he asked directly, do people have a vacuum cleaner? And I'm sitting, David, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I'm sitting in the back of the room listening to this and I'm thinking, you know, when I had my first apartment, I didn't own a vacuum cleaner. And I had 2 cats and I was there for 5 years. Okay, does that give you an idea as to why one of David's questions is do you own a vacuum cleaner? Because it was really kind of nasty when I left. Right,
So
David?
Christina, you wouldn't want to rent to someone like you then? You'd be one of those.
Exactly. That's precisely what I'm telling you. Is I would not want to rent to myself when I was a young lady, right? I was just graduated college, right? So there you go. So David, thank you very much. This is perfect. Let's see if there's any questions. So we can take 2 questions from the room. Anybody got a question for David?
I do.
I do. Online.
Dude,
Perfect. Speak
Christy-
up.
Christy Sherrod in Rialto, California, and I was
Thank
in
you.
one of the rooms with you, David, earlier. My question is, you mentioned about finding the tenants. Where or how do you advertise to get the good tenants that you want?
Yeah, I think you ought to start, and obviously you go online, and I think you ought to go to Google and go, whatever your product is. For me, I'd go houses for rent in Colorado Springs, and I'd see, excuse me, I'd see what comes up on the first page that's not an advertisement. And I'll tell you right now, for me, Zillow is the number one. We put it on multiple websites, but Zillow is really crucial. It does well. Where I don't put it is I don't put it on Craigslist. Too many of the ads appear to get stolen on stolen on Craigslist and reposted in a different state by someone who's a missionary in Africa and just wants someone to be a good steward of the house, and they offer it to them at half the normal rent, as long as they'll send the deposit to them, wire it right away.
Yes.
Do watermark all your photographs on everything you advertise. We put our corporate name and our phone number really big and ugly diagonally across the picture. And so that you want them to steal someone else's listings, not yours. And that works well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Is there one more question? Yeah, just unmute yourself if you want, if you're online. Going once, going twice. All right, we're going to call it good. David, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh my God, there's a question here in the room. I missed it, David. There was a question in the
Thank
room.
you.
Where was the question here in the room? What's your question?
He always said, find a good house.
Okay, so David, what's your parameters for what is a good house? What makes a good house?
Well, I mean, it may be different things for different people depending on where you're located. For me, I need a minimum of 3 bedrooms. I really don't want to advertise more than 4 bedrooms. I need at least 2 bathrooms because I need 1 bathroom off the master bedroom. Why? Because as they start to have kids, I don't want them to fight to get ready for work in the morning with their kids using the same bathroom. And I need a 2-car garage with a garage door opener. But my properties are in Colorado Springs and we get stuff that's called snow here. And so that's important to me. So it's different depending on where you live and what you're dealing with. I've heard of people in retirement communities that just do 2-bedroom houses and it works just great. They have one as an office or as an office guest room combination and the other as a room for themselves. So you got to look at your market and decide what's right for you.